Hello there, welcome to the Football Bloc. My name is Brandon. Today we're going to look back at match day 1 of the 2023 AFCON. I'm going to look at every match. I'm going to give you my reaction as well as my analysis. So if that sounds interesting, let's hop right into it.
One step beyond.
So every team of AFCON 2023 has played at least one match. We've seen a lot of upsets, and I mean a lot of upsets. Almost every single one of the major teams or serious teams did not get a victory here, which is crazy. A lot of the big players didn't really have that great of a performance. They didn't really show up. On the flip side, a lot of relatively unknown or players that are under the radar had great performances, and a lot of teams that not a lot of people were expecting to do anything so far had some great performances as well. So let's go match by match. The opening match of the tournament, Ivory Coast versus Guinea-Bissau. I already did a more in-depth analysis on that match. You can go back and watch my previous video there if you're interested. Overall, to summarize it very briefly, I think Ivory Coast had a pretty commendable performance, considering that they're the hosts, considering that they are playing in the opening match of the tournament. Fofana in midfield there had a really good performance as well, but Guinea-Bissau also had a valiant performance. Despite being outmatched, they still played well. Now going into the next match here, the next match from that group, we had Nigeria versus Equatorial Guinea. This was very highly anticipated match, considering Nigeria, of course, historically one of the best teams in Africa. Also, you just look at that front line they have. I mean, Osimhen, who, if not for Holland and Harry Kane, was the best striker in the world, at least in 2023. Then you also have a bunch of other very talented attackers, whether it be Chukwueze or Lookman or Iheanacho, or there's a bunch of these guys on the team. Now, of course, the further you look into the team, whether it be the midfield or the defense, the quality severely dips, but still. Now, as for Equatorial Guinea, they don't have a bunch of names that pop off the paper like Nigeria. They are still a team that has done consistently well in previous AFCONs. I mean, they got to the semifinals in, I believe it was 2015 when they were the host there. They had a bunch of upsets the last time around in 2021. And they pulled off another upset here in this match, in my opinion. I think that Nigeria relied way too much on Osimhen. This match was very, I guess, disappointing to watch if you're a Nigerian fan, because for all the talent that they have up top, they just could not get them to work together. Nigeria had a decent amount of chances, especially towards the end of the match, but it was Equatorial Guinea that opened the scoring there, deservedly so. Equatorial Guinea was able to be very calm and collected and just wait for their moment to strike, while Nigeria had more of the possession, more of the shots. Now, Osimhen was able to equalize very quickly, almost immediately after Equatorial Guinea opened the score. But it never looked like Nigeria was in control of the match, even as the match went into the final minutes, and Nigeria was able to force the Equatorial Guinea goalkeeper into numerous very close saves, which he was able to, he was able to save them very impressively so. It never really looked like Nigeria deserved the win, or that they would really seriously push for a winner there, like I said, minus those few chances at the end. So overall, deserved draw for Equatorial Guinea, and I think this is going to throw the group into a bit of a chaos, because remember, the third place team can go through if you're one of the better third place teams. And like I said, Guinea-Bissau performed okay against Ivory Coast, and Equatorial Guinea had a pretty good performance here as well. And if Nigeria can't get their whole team to click, who knows what's going to happen there. Moving on into the next group, we have Egypt versus Mozambique, in a game that I personally thought going into this game that Egypt was going to have a pretty comfortable win. I thought that Egypt with the talent that they have, with kind of this chip on their shoulder for how they got to the AFCON final and lost on penalties, or how They went up against Senegal only a month later in World Cup qualifying and lost again on penalties, missing out on the World Cup. I thought that they would have this chip on their shoulder going into this tournament trying to win the whole thing. I know that it may have been an unrealistic prediction considering how much of a patchwork that team kind of is. It's a team that's severely punching above its weight, heavily relying on their goalkeeper El Shenawy, relying on individual defenders as well as Mohamed Salah up top. But if you look at a guy like Mustafa Mohamed, who is the star striker for Egypt in this tournament, who is playing wonderful in Ligue 1 in France, I thought that, maybe some of the new blood in this team can push them over the edge, even though they don't have Carlos Queiroz as a manager. And the beginning of this match, it looked like that prediction was about to ring true. They played really well. Mustafa Mohamed scored one of the best goals we'll probably see this tournament. With his back to goal, he was able to spin while falling and then hit the ball into the bottom corner. Very impressive finish there. But then Egypt kind of lost their composure towards the end of the first half and especially into the second half. Mozambique scored and then scored again. They were leading over Egypt, and deservedly so. Egypt had just no spark in them. They didn't look like they had any aggression going forward. They looked like they kind of were just very passive. They went into desperation mode at the end of the match. They were able to get a penalty, bit of a lucky penalty in my opinion. Mohamed Salah stepped up for the penalty. Despite having a pretty poor game overall, he did score to salvage a draw for Mozambique. Otherwise, that would have been the first big loss of the AFCON so far, the first biggest upset. Mozambique overall, very commendable performance. In Egypt, at times looked great. So this is not doomsday. This is not a crisis situation. I think they can build upon this, but they need to really switch up the mentality if they want to go any farther in this tournament. If you were gutted that we didn't see an upset in that match, then you only had to wait a few hours later, because in that same group there was an upset as Cape Verde beat Ghana 2-1 in a game that I don't think a lot of people saw coming. I didn't really see coming. Now, I will admit, I do think that this Ghanaian team is actually very overrated. I think that they have gotten very lucky on previous occasions, like, for example, getting to the World Cup based upon a goalkeeping error from Nigeria. I think that was very lucky to do that. And I think this is a team that has been in decline ever since, say, the 2014 World Cup. Obviously, they didn't make the 2018 World Cup. They didn't really have any, meaningful performances at 2019 AFCON. They're terrible at the 2021 AFCON, getting eliminated in the group stage. And then they somehow, like I said, made it to the World Cup. But again, it was pretty lucky. Because of that, I think they had a lot of expectations on them to perform. But a lot of people with those expectations forgot how poor the team was, just 12 months before the World Cup started, or actually just 6 months before the World Cup started. I can't say that I expected Cape Verde to beat them, though. Despite Cape Verde being a team that has pulled off a bunch of upsets in previous AFCONs, this was a game that was very back and forth. It was very open. It was very fun to watch. Cape Verde was able to score. Jaimiro Monteiro opened the scoring. Deflected goal, kind of probably a mistake from the goalkeeper. Probably should have held on to the shot, but more so of the blame is on the defenders for just being so porous. Now, Ghana scored a goal that they really thought should have stood. I personally think it probably should have stood as well, as called off for being offside. But Ghana would score regardless off corner in the second half. But even though they were making some chances going forward, this was possibly the worst defensive performance I've seen of any team so far at this AFCON. Cape Verde had so many chances going forward. It looked like they weren't really even trying. Every time that they would get on the ball, which wasn't a whole lot because Ghana had more of the possession, but still, every time they would counterattack, every time they would piece together some type of move going forward, they would completely split open Ghana's defense, forcing the keeper into a bunch of saves. And they would eventually score with mere seconds left on the clock. This was a ball that was looped over the top. A comical mistake from the three defenders. They all looked like they were going to jump for it. They all like hit into each other. One guy hesitated. The ball fell right to the striker for Cape Verde, came off the bench. He was able to pass it right to Gary Rodriguez, who tapped it into a wide open net to seal the win, a very deserved win for Cape Verde over Ghana. Now, the next match we're going to look at, we have Senegal versus Gambia. This would not be an upset, though. Despite Gambia having such an impressive performance, making it all the way to the quarterfinals of the last AFCON, they weren't able to replicate those impressive performances here. I thought they were completely outplayed by Senegal, who are the defending champions, who have one of the best squads in Africa right now. Interestingly enough, I don't think that Sadio Mane, who's the star of the team, really had that great of a game, but this Senegalese team is so good, and they had such a good performance that he didn't really need to have a good game there. It was the first goal was from Gay, and then Camara scored a brace to seal off a 3-0 victory for Senegal. The second goal of his and the third goal in the match overall was particularly really nice to watch. A curling finish from outside of the box into the top corner. Very impressive performance from Senegal. If you look at all the teams so far that have played, probably the most impressive so far. Then we had Cameroon going up against Guinea, and this was a match that was another upset because Cameroon, obviously champions of the 2017 AFCON, they have been to many World Cups. They were at the last World Cup. They had that impressive win over Brazil, an impressive tie with Serbia. They also had a really good performance at the last AFCON as they were the host. They got all the way to the semifinals. They won third place. But this match here, it looks like the team, I think, has kind of run its course. A lot of the players, our standout players from that era, are getting very old. And this was a very lethargic, very fatigue-like performance from Cameroon here. Guinea had a bit of spring in their step. It looked like they wanted the victory more at certain times of this match, but because Cameroon has more talent, it kind of equaled out, and I think a 1-1 draw is pretty fair. Going forward, I don't think Cameroon is going to be able to replicate that success that they had at the last AFCON. They were my favorite team to watch at the last AFCON just because of how fun they were. Boubacar and Toko Kambi just combined for so many goals. I think it was 13 goals between just the two of those players right there. But unfortunately, it looks like that magic may not be able to be replicated this time around. In yet another upset, we had Angola going up against Algeria in a match that finished 1-1. Now, Algeria is a team that at one point people were saying it's not only the best team in Africa, they're one of the best teams in the world. They can be making quarterfinals of the World Cup, maybe even the semifinals of the World Cup. They crushed everyone at the 2019 AFCON, deserved champions. And if you just look at their players, at their clubs, they were playing amazing. And Riyad Mahrez obviously winning tons of trophies with Manchester City. You also had guys like Brahimi and Bunaja and Islam Samani. Very talented team overall, but even more so than the names on the field was just the team mentality that they had. They won the Arab Cup in 2021 as well with basically like a B squad, but the last AFCON, they went in the tournament with such high expectations. I think they got a little arrogant. There was probably also a bit of fatigue with the players that were playing in the Arab Cup because the Arab Cup is only a month before the AFCON. And they had an abysmal performance, one of the worst performances of any defending champion that you'll ever see at an AFCON. They got eliminated in the group stage. They lost to some pretty easy opponents. It was a very easy group for them. People were expecting them to coast by, and they did not. They completely got blown out of the tournament there. They almost redeemed themselves with a win over Cameroon to get to the World Cup, but they were robbed of that. It wasn't a bad performance. I actually think that they were hard done by some poor refereeing. There was a handball there. There was a goal that was disallowed. There was a goal that shouldn't. A bunch of stuff. They should have gone to the World Cup at the expense of Cameroon. But still, it has been a rather disappointing, let's say, 18 months for Algeria, considering how high they were at one point. The first match of this game against Angola is a team that, in the mid-2000s, they had a bit of a, I guess you can say, golden generation. They got to the 2006 World Cup, but since then, they're not really anything to write home about. The first half against Angola, Algeria looked like it was the real Algeria. They were playing beautiful football. Guys were getting on the ball. They were looking really dynamic. They just were confusing the Angolan defenders with their intricate play. Bounedjah scored a really nice goal, and then he almost scored what easily would have been the goal of the tournament. He had his back to goal. He settled the ball off his chest and then hit it with a flying scissors kick, and the goalkeeper had no chance. Now, it was ruled off for being offside, unfortunately, but correctly. But that momentum completely deflated in the second half. Angola came out swinging. They were able to get an equalizer off a penalty. Bit of a soft penalty, but still a penalty nonetheless. And then Algeria never looked like they were really going to score a winner. It was a very lethargic performance. They always say, game of two halves. This is a prime example of that, where Algeria was so great in the first half and then really disappointing in the second half. Riyad Mahrez didn't really do anything this match. I'm a little disappointed in his performance there. Now, this isn't the end of the world, of course. We've seen so many teams going in and out with these upsets so far. So all Algeria really have to do is capitalize on what went right in the first half, and then try to avoid what went wrong in the second half. And then going forward, I think they can make a deep run as long as they just mitigate these mistakes, some of these silly defensive mistakes, and they really get Riyad Mahrez more involved. On to the next game, we have Burkina Faso versus Mauritania. And as I said before, there's this trend of the big teams not playing well. Burkina Faso might not be the most prominent national team on an international level, but in the AFCON, they definitely are one of the big teams. Obviously, they got to the final in 2013. They got to the semifinals just the last time we had an AFCON. They have some very talented players on their team historically and right now, so they can be considered one of the big teams when you look at their record. And they also had a very underwhelming performance here. Now, they were able to come away with a win, just defeating Mauritania 1-0 in a game that should have been much more for Burkina Faso when you consider the skill level between them and Mauritania. It eventually was a penalty that settled the match. Very, very late on, it looked like it was going to be a 0-0 result, but it ended up as a 1-0 victory for Burkina Faso thanks to a penalty from Bertrand Traoré, who has always stepped up for his country. On to the next match, we have definitely the biggest upset of the tournament so far. We had Tunisia going up against Namibia, and Namibia edging out a 1-0 victory, their first ever victory at an AFCON. Completely insane scenes right there. Now, some people have had doubts about this Tunisian team heading into the tournament, and they expected them to, maybe get out of the group but finish in second, maybe even third. I was not one of those people. I had actually pretty high expectations for this Tunisian squad. I thought that they were going to go pretty far in this tournament. I thought that they had a pretty solid team, especially when you consider how admirable their performance was at the World Cup. Obviously, defeating France, the eventual finalist. But none of that was evident here in this game. They played terrible. Namibia won, but not only did they win, I think they fully deserved the win. In fact, if you go back and just watch the replays, I watched this game live, and I was thinking, okay, Tunisia's going to kick in eventually. Watching the replays back, I was like, man, Namibia was actually the better team from the entirety of the 90 minutes. I'm surprised that it took them this late for them to eventually win, because they did score with a header very late on in the match. Like I said, deserved win. Very poor performance from Tunisia, and they need to, pick up the slack if they want to, even qualify out of the group there. On from there, we have Mali versus South Africa, and in my opinion, I think these two teams are around the same level of quality. Mali is better, but I don't think it's that big of a gap. So this was a pretty interesting game to watch. I think it was pretty back and forth. I think that South Africa had a few chances here and there. Mali overall was slightly the better team, and I think the score perfectly reflects that. They eventually grabbed 2 of the goals in the end of the second half, the first of which almost was a beautiful goal. It could have been the goal of the tournament. It was a free kick from outside of the box, pretty far out from a strange angle. It cannoned off the crossbar, bounced off, and eventually was bundled over the line. Had it hit off the crossbar and into the net, it would have been, I believe, the first free kick goal of this AFCON, and it would have been, top 3 in the, probably the goal of the tournament at this point. Deserved win for Mali there. Moving on, we also have Morocco going up against Tanzania, and I talked a lot about big teams underperforming and having underwhelming performance. This was a complete opposite. Morocco came away with a smashing 3-0 victory here. It's not to say that Tanzania was garbage. They didn't play bad. It was a brave performance from them. They even had a few chances as well. Nothing super troubling for Bono in goal, but still, they carved out some chances, but Morocco was just a class above. They were a much better team. They opened the scoring in the first half there, and then they eventually grabbed 2 goals late on in the second half as Tanzania started to get more fatigued. Their game plan kind of fell apart a little bit at the end there. But if you just look at this Moroccan team from top to bottom, it's full of immensely talented players, one of the best squads, if not the best squad in Africa. And then also, who can forget their amazing World Cup run just a year ago. So a lot of expectations on Morocco, and just based upon this particular match here, they are currently living up to it. Aside from Senegal, who also had a 3-0 win, that win over Gambia, they are so far the only 2 of the biggest teams to actually show up. As for the last match we're going to talk about, we have the DR Congo versus Zambia. And Zambia is a team that has history in the AFCON. They won the 2012 AFCON with Hervé Renard as their coach. One of the best underdog stories in football history. Not a lot of people outside of Africa are aware of that, but wonderful performance there. As the years have gone by, though, they haven't really replicated anything close to that level of success. Meanwhile, DR Congo, while they haven't, I guess, won any silverware, they have had some very talented teams in the past, some very talented players as well. And this was a game where I think that DR Congo really should have won. It finished 1-1. The goal that Zambia scored was, just an utter calamity at the back. The goalkeeper came rushing out of goal. He tried to participate in this passing triangle, and then he got caught out. The ball fell to a Zambian player, and he was able to just easily lob it all the way over the goalkeeper, over the last 2 center backs, and into the goal. Completely against the run of play as well. DR Congo was outplaying them, and the Congolese had chance after chance after chance after chance throughout. Immediately after conceding that goal, throughout the rest of the match, I really thought that they were eventually going to find the winner. They did equalize, but they weren't able to find the winner. They weren't clinical enough there. They were creating a lot of serious chances, but they just weren't able to finish them off. I think going forward, DR Congo needs to be much more clinical if they want to make any strides in this tournament, because you can create as many chances as you want, but if no one's putting them in the back of the net, then you have a serious problem. So anyway, that has been my complete recap of every single match so far of AFCON 2023, the match they won. Let me know what you think of all the matches. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? What do you think of this weird trend of all the big teams just not showing up? And in between Morocco and Senegal, which is ironic because if you asked me before the tournament who was going to, be the contenders, I would say it's between those 2 teams. A lot of people said that as well. I didn't seriously think it was just going to be between those teams. And, besides Ivory Coast, no one else looks like they're going to get anywhere close to winning this tournament. But between Senegal and Morocco, and, you can throw Ivory Coast in there as well. Who do you think had the best performance out of all these teams here in this opening match? I personally would probably say Senegal, but it is close between Morocco. Let me know all your thoughts in the section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share this video with a friend, follow the Football Bloc on social media. But anyway, guys, my name is Brandon, and this has been the Football Bloc. Hope you guys have a nice rest of your night.
One step beyond.